Have you ever wondered why, in the 21st century, with all our technology, our global connectivity, our supposed civilizational evolution, we still live in a world where war is not the exception but the rule? Why, even when there are no declared conflicts, we live under the constant threat of military tensions, arms races, and an economy that seems to prosper precisely when destruction looms on the horizon? The answer isn't found in the superficial analyses of news broadcasts, nor in the conspiracy theories circulating through social media. The answer is buried in the very DNA of capitalism itself, and it was Karl Marx who first unearthed this disturbing truth. Capitalism doesn't merely tolerate war, it requires it as a condition of its own survival. To understand why capitalism needs war like an addict needs their drug, we must first deconstruct the comforting mythology we've been sold about what capitalism really is. It's not simply a neutral economic system, a tool we can use for good or evil. Capitalism is an ontological machine, a way of being that colonizes not just markets, but subjectivities, desires, and even our capacity to imagine alternatives. Marx identified that capitalism operates through a fundamental contradiction he called the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. This isn't abstract economic theory. It's the key to understanding why we live in a world perpetually on the brink of the abyss. Capital, in its relentless pursuit of accumulation, tends to replace human labor with machinery, with technology, with automation. But here's the deadly paradox. Profit in the capitalist system can only be extracted from living human labor. When capital replaces workers with machines, it undermines its own source of profit. Imagine a vampire that, in its thirst for blood, systematically kills all its potential victims. Eventually, the vampire finds itself in a world without blood, starving to death precisely because of its own predatory success. This is the perfect image of capitalist dynamics, a system that destroys the very conditions of its own reproduction. But capitalism found a diabolical solution to this contradiction: productive destruction. If the problem is excess capital, the solution is to destroy capital massively and systematically. And there's no more efficient form of mass destruction than war. War doesn't just destroy infrastructure, cities, factories, and human lives. It creates gigantic artificial demand for reconstruction. It's the perfect cycle: massive destruction followed by massive reconstruction, both profitable for capital. David Harvey, following Marx's trail, demonstrated how capitalism constantly needs spatial fixes, geographical expansion, and territorial reorganization as escape valves for its crises of overaccumulation. When domestic markets saturate, when profit rates plummet, capital needs to find new territories to exploit, new markets to penetrate, new populations to submit to the logic of accumulation. And when these territories resist, when they refuse to open their doors to transnational capital, the need for military intervention arises. It's no coincidence that the world's greatest military powers are also the centers of global capitalism. It's no coincidence that every major economic crisis is followed by a period of intensified militarization. World War II wasn't just the result of political tensions. It was capitalism's solution to the Great Depression of the 1930s. The military Keynesianism that followed transformed arms production into a permanent sector of the economy, creating what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. Today, in 2025, we live under the regime of permanent war, but a war that has become even more sophisticated, more diffuse, more total than Marx could have imagined. It's not just conventional military conflicts, although these continue to exist in profusion. We live under multiple forms of war, cyber warfare, informational warfare, economic warfare, cultural warfare, the war on terror that became terror against entire populations. Look at today's global economy, and you'll see Marxist logic operating with crystalline clarity. The United States, the hegemonic power of global capitalism, maintains military bases in over 70 countries. Its military budget exceeds that of the next 10 countries combined. But this isn't abstract imperial megalomania. It's structural necessity for American capitalism. The military machine isn't a parasite on the American economy. It's the heart pumping blood through the entire system. Silicon Valley, presented as the epitome of peaceful and creative innovation, is actually a military-industrial complex disguised as a tech park. Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, all these corporations have massive contracts with the Pentagon, developing surveillance technologies, autonomous weapons systems, cyber warfare infrastructure. The artificial intelligence that revolutionizes our daily lives is the same AI being weaponized to create automated death systems. The internet itself, this network that supposedly connects us in a peaceful global village, was born as ARPANET, an American military project to maintain communications in case of nuclear war. The social platforms that shape our subjectivity are battlefields in global informational warfare. Every like, every share, every comment is an act of psychological warfare, an attempt to colonize consciousness and mold behavior. But contemporary warfare isn't limited to traditional geographical territories. Contemporary capitalism has declared war against the very possibility of a future. Climate change isn't an unfortunate side effect of economic growth. It's the direct result of an accumulation logic that treats the planet as an infinite source of resources and infinite garbage dump. The war against climate is a war against future generations, a form of temporal violence that mortgages the future to finance present profits. But the true revolution in contemporary capitalist warfare isn't in drones or nuclear weapons. It's in algorithms. We live under the regime of what we can call algorithmic capitalism, where value extraction happens not just through exploitation of physical labor, but through the capture and processing of behavioral data in real time. Shoshana Zuboff coined the term surveillance capitalism to describe this new phase. But what she identified is even more radical than her analysis suggests. It's not just surveillance. It's a completely new form of warfare. War against human spontaneity itself. The algorithms of major platforms don't just observe our behavior. They model it, anticipate it, control it. Every time you open Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, you're entering an algorithmic battlefield where your nervous system is the territory in dispute. What you see, what you feel, what you desire, what you fear. All of this is being modulated by artificial intelligence systems trained to maximize not your happiness or well-being, but your engagement, your attention captured and monetized. This is a form of warfare Marx couldn't have predicted, but which perfectly follows the logic he identified. Capitalism constantly needs to find new territories to colonize, new resources to exploit. When geographical territories are exhausted, when natural resources become scarce, capital turns to the last unexplored territory, the interior of human consciousness. Algorithmic warfare is total not because it spans the entire planet, but because it spans all experience. There's no waking moment when we're not potentially connected, captured, processed by the capitalist machine. Even when we sleep, our phones continue collecting data about our sleep patterns, our location, our digital dreams. But why does war exert such powerful fascination over the human psyche under capitalism? Why do entire populations support conflicts that clearly don't serve their material interests? The answer lies in what Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari called the libidinal economy, the way desire is captured and channeled by the capitalist system. Capitalism doesn't function just through external coercion. It functions through the production of subjectivities that desire their own submission. War offers a perverse form of transcendence, a temporary escape from the alienated monotony of daily life under capitalism. In a world where most people work meaningless jobs, where social life has been atomized, where the future seems blocked, war promises meaning, community, purpose. Jean Baudrillard observed that we live under the regime of simulation, where reality has been replaced by its media representations. But war is the moment when the real erupts through the layer of simulations. It's the moment when consequences become irreversibly material. That's why war exerts morbid attraction. It promises a return to the real in a world saturated with virtuality. Fascism, as a political form that emerges from capitalism's crises, perfectly understood this libidinal dynamic. Fascism offers an aestheticization of politics that transforms destruction into spectacle, violence into purifying ritual, war into total artwork. It's no coincidence that fascism emerged precisely in capitalism's moments of most acute crisis, in the 1930s and again today, in our era of climate crisis and social disintegration. Walter Benjamin warned about fascism's aestheticization of politics. But what we live today is even more perverse. The gamification of war. Contemporary conflicts are presented as real-time video games, with scorecards of dead and wounded, with technology that makes violence abstract and distant. Military drones are operated by young soldiers who grew up playing Call of Duty, transforming genocide into an extension of digital entertainment. The most radical form of warfare that contemporary capitalism wages is war against the future itself. Mark Fisher coined the term capitalist realism to describe the condition where it became easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. But this difficulty imagining alternatives isn't a cultural accident. It's the result of systematic warfare against utopian imagination. Contemporary capitalism isn't content to dominate the present. It needs to colonize the future, block any possibility of systematic alternative. This is achieved through multiple strategies. Technological acceleration that makes obsolete all forms of collective planning. Financialization that subordinates all social decisions to the logic of speculative markets. Gamification that reduces politics to a form of interactive entertainment. The climate crisis exemplifies this war against the future perfectly. We have overwhelming scientific evidence that we're marching toward ecological collapse. But capitalism's logic prevents us from taking necessary measures to avoid catastrophe. Financial markets operate in quarterly cycles. The atmosphere operates in decade cycles. The incompatibility between these temporalities is structural, not accidental. This catastrophic temporality produces what we can call apocalyptic melancholia, a psychic condition where we know the world is ending but continue acting as if nothing is happening. We buy, work, consume, vote as if the future were guaranteed, while consciously knowing it isn't. So here we stand, at the bleeding edge of history, face to face with a truth that Marx saw coming more than a century ago. Capitalism and war aren't separate phenomena that occasionally intersect. They are two faces of the same ontological violence, two expressions of a system that can only reproduce itself through the systematic destruction of life itself. The COVID-19 pandemic gave us a perfect laboratory to observe this dynamic in action. While small businesses closed by the millions, while workers lost jobs and homes, Major corporations saw their profits explode. The same system that couldn't organize a coherent public health response managed to transfer trillions of dollars upward to the wealthy. Death became profitable. Suffering became an investment opportunity. But perhaps the most disturbing realization is this: we are not passive victims of this machine. We are its willing accomplices. Every day, through 1,000 small choices, we reproduce the very system that destroys us. We compete instead of cooperating. We consume instead of creating. We scroll instead of organizing. We retreat into private anxiety instead of building collective power. Marx showed us that capitalism contains within itself the seeds of its own destruction, but also the seeds of something new. The question that haunts us in 2025 is whether we will find the courage to plant those seeds before the machine devours what remains of our world. The war machine runs on our complicity, our exhaustion, our inability to imagine alternatives. But imagination, Marx reminds us, is the first act of revolution. The war is not coming. The war is here. The only question is, which side will we choose? The side of life or the side of capital? The future is watching. The dead are counting on us. And time, that most precious of resources that capitalism has stolen from us, is running out. The revolution will not be televised. It will be lived, or it will not be at all.